Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews. Great to have you with me here every single week. And today, once again, we have a very interesting topic that we're going to be covering. And this will be appealing to many people, both Christians and non-Christians, Muslims in particular, because today we are talking about the actual location of Mount Sinai. Now, my guest today is Ryan Mauro. He is the producer of a documentary that you can actually find on YouTube and watch. It's called Finding the Mountain of Moses, or the Mountain of Moses, Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, of all places. Ryan, welcome to Colliding Worldviews.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is a 25-minute documentary that has now had, it looks like, 1.5 million views on YouTube. Ryan went to Saudi Arabia to get the footage here, and it's very interesting because when we read about in the Bible, it doesn't say Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia is a more modern term that we have for what was known as Arabia at the years ago and at the time of Muhammad. Ryan, why did you want to get involved in this project?
I've really been interested in this theory that the reason we weren't finding enough evidence that the Exodus story actually happened is because we were following the wrong route. That Mount Sinai itself, which would be the centerpiece of finding the right path, was just located in the wrong spot. I didn't grow up in a really religious household. I never went to church or anything like that. And then I keep trying to figure out, like 11 or 12, something like that, when I did start going to church and became spiritual, but I didn't fully believe in the Bible. I kind of believed in God at that point, but not the Bible as a historical source. And literally the Bible that I had that was for kids actually said over in the side that there had been a lack of, or I think I actually said no. Yeah, there was no archaeological evidence for the Exodus that has been found to date. And that was because other parts of that kid's Bible did have evidence for other stories, but it said for the Exodus, none. And so that really messed with me. And I just started searching online. I came across this theory that Mount Sinai was actually in Saudi Arabia. And if you follow that alternative theory, then various pieces of evidence would be found that would really verify the story and make it realistic. And there had been a handful of explorers who had snuck in, been arrested, but then their evidence was confiscated. And the footage and pictures that leaked out looked like something from like an AOL spam message, like a chain letter that you would get back in those days. So a lot of people weren't convinced by it. But I just kept researching it, and more it seemed plausible. And a miracle happened. I had an opportunity to go myself.
Excellent. And people can see in the video, we're going to try to show a few clips of the documentary here so people can get a little taste or teaser of it. But again, 1.5 million views on YouTube. Now, even the technician who's going to be showing this to us today, and we pray for the technicians. They do great work behind the scenes. He has heard from Muslims who have mentioned this theory, but he figured, okay, just like other people or other Muslims will say, oh yeah, this is in Saudi Arabia, and therefore Islam is true. But this, of course, is not the case. What we're finding here is archaeological evidence for the biblical account. Yes, there is a God. Christians and Muslims would agree on that. However, as soon as you ask who is God, who is Jesus, you get completely different answers there. And of course, Christianity is true, Islam is false. We read about in the Bible that over 70 times the Israelites went out of Egypt to Midian. But Ryan, even though they went out of Egypt to Midian, there's been a belief for many years that they were still technically in Egypt. Like Midian is a place in Egypt. How old is this belief, and what archaeological problems do we have with it?
Well, part of the reason that this has been messed up in terms of figuring out where the Red Sea crossing was and where Mount Sinai is because only in relatively recent history, in the past few hundred years, has it been understood that there actually is a Gulf of Aqaba, this part of the Red Sea that exists between Egypt's Sinai Peninsula and Saudi Arabia, or what the Bible calls Midian. So if you look at old maps, you'll see them fused together, or maybe a small body of water. But these maps were just always wrong because they didn't have Google Earth back then, and they didn't have modern explorers going and really making a detailed map of all of this. And so we believe, according to the research of Dr. Glenn Fritz and others, that Yam Suf, where the Red Sea crossing happened, is the Gulf of Aqaba part of the Red Sea. And that really changes everything in terms of where you do archaeology, where you're looking for things, and where you interpret things. As for Midian, that is universally known to be northwestern Saudi Arabia, as we call it today, include parts of Jordan. Some people would argue that it would include parts of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, which is where the traditional site is located, based on the fact that there were Midianite workers there in the mines. But there were Egyptian military bases there. So it wasn't really part of Midian. And part of the reason you'll see some maps today that will say it was is because they're also basing that off of the traditional Mount Sinai. I mean, we call it the Sinai Peninsula today in Egypt, based off of that incorrect identification of the traditional site as Mount Sinai.
And I want to let our viewers know again, Saudi Arabia, as we know it today, that is a modern term of the government that is there. But for a long time, of course, it was just known as Arabia in general. Again, this does not prove Islam is true. It's simply giving archaeological evidence for places. When we talk about the fact that Jesus Christ died on a cross, that he rose from the dead, and every single year we find more archaeological discoveries that prove the Bible is true, this is simply giving us more evidence of the places that the Bible talks about. Again, this happened thousands of years before Islam even came about, because even according to tradition, Muhammad was born in 570. All these places existed way before that. So again, this is just more evidence for the biblical account of what happened and where it happened. Ryan, in the documentary, you talk about how well this location is pretty much sealed off by the Saudi government, and it seems like they want to keep people away from there. But when you went there, you talked with different Bedouin people there who were telling you, hey, did you know that Moses was here? And they'd give these different details that were lining up with what you were thinking. Please share a little bit about that, about how the Saudi government has kind of sealed this off, and why are they hiding this archaeological evidence from the world?
Sure. So there's been a long Saudi tradition. They say going back generations and generations, that this specific area called Al-Bad, which old maps will refer to as Madian or Midian. So Midian was probably actually referring to this specific spot called Al-Bad in Saudi Arabia, where Jethro lived. The tradition there is so strong that every single Saudi will tell you that, me too. Did you know that Jethro was here and Moses came here? Here's the well where Moses met with the daughters of Jethro. And then near that, just outside, is where this other candidate for Mount Sinai is located that, like I said, some others have identified and I just followed up with and got this footage. And that mountain, if you go close to it, the people that live around it refer to it as the Mountain of Moses. And at each of the sites that we show in this 25-minute video online, there is a local tradition that it is exactly what we describe in the film. You go to what we think is Elam, where there's 12 wells still to this day. The Bible says that Moses and the Israelites, when they needed water on the way to Mount Sinai, they stopped at a spot called Elam that had 70 palms and 12 wells. The trees have since multiplied, but there's 12 wells along that path. And Saudis will tell you, hey, this is where Moses and the Yahud, the Jews, came and stayed. And yes, this is Elam. The split rock, for example, the same thing will happen. We know the miracle where Moses struck a rock and the water came forth when it split. We have a candidate for that. You go there, the local Saudis will say that they were told by their grandfather, who was told by their grandfather, that this is the split rock of Moses, or they'll sometimes call it the water of Moses. But the bottom line is, this is where that miracle has happened, according to the people that live there. Now, why do the Saudis cover this up? I think there's a multitude of reasons. I do think that there is some mainstream scientific and archaeological resistance overall, that just like we have in the United States, to these alternative theories, especially ones that back up the biblical account, or in their line, it would be the Quranic account. So they have alternate explanations from some experts. But by and large, I think the Saudi government does believe these sites are related to Moses. I mean, they have them fenced off, they have patrols, people have been arrested, threatened. I've been intimidated and interrogated for trying to go. And the reason I think that the Saudis do that is the primary reason is for geopolitical reasons, because the ramifications of having essentially another Jerusalem, but in Saudi Arabia near Mecca and Medina, that's a pretty hot potato to hold on to. And then secondly, ideologically, they want to keep out Western influence. If you announce that all this is there, Western influence is going to come in. And according to Sharia law that they institute, they're supposed to destroy anything, even if it's Islamic, that they believe becomes put on the same level as God, that becomes worship instead of God. So people go there and they start taking dirt, and then they sell it saying that it could heal your illnesses, or miracles happen there due to the buildings there as opposed to God. Then they have to come in and destroy it. So from the Saudi logic, according to Sharia law, the way you save these sites is by covering them up and not talking about it.
And the interesting part here too is that when you were there in the video, you actually can see when you guys were. Please talk about the story where you guys were shot at a couple of times. You're being chased. You're trying to get out of a particular area.
Yeah, I don't know if they were trying to hit me with the bullet, but there was. Yeah, I was climbing up the split rock, and I was about halfway towards coming down, and there was a gunshot, which I figured. I don't know. I just maybe someone's hunting or something. Whatever. I didn't want to think about it. And then there was another gunshot, and my friend with me brought the drone down because we snuck drones in, which are a lot louder than I anticipated and a lot easier to spot. And in that world, it's easy for someone to see a drone, and if you see some Americans, you're thinking like CIA. So we brought the drone down so it didn't get shot. And then as we're getting ready and leaving, we saw a car coming towards us. And they basically followed us, chased us essentially out of there. And they just stopped following us once we came out of the valley where the Split Rock is. And that's historically where we've heard the most stories of people being violently threatened, or people trying to say, hey, I'm arresting you as a local Bedouin and I'm bringing you to the police. And bringing their guns out. Now, luckily, the good news is that I think the Saudis got scared by the negative publicity this film brought, because we have it in Arabic. It's gotten a lot of media attention, including in the Middle East. And now things have loosened up. So there are people going to the Split Rock, and it's never been like this before in history. And they're not encountering that type of resistance. In fact, I heard a story of one person from the Saudi Archaeological Department who was there, and a guy showed up and thought, oh no, I'm done, I'm in trouble. And the archaeological guy came up to him and showed him my film and said, are you here because of this? And showed him the Split Rock scene. And the guy says, yes. And the guy said, welcome to Saudi Arabia. So I think this film and the works of other people like Joel Richardson, who has an awesome book about this, called something like Mount Sinai in Arabia, something to that effect. It's Joel Richardson. Everyone should buy his book. I think that pressure has caused the Saudis to change their calculations, and you're going to see the doors open to Mount Sinai and also open to visits from Christians, specifically Christian tours, very soon.
And people are definitely going to want to keep up to date with that. In this video, again, we've shown you a couple of little snippets of it here. Again, this is a 25-minute documentary, 1.5 million views on YouTube thus far. In the video, you will see actual video footage of a number of places that look exactly like the Bible describes them. The mountain of Moses, you saw in one of the video clips there, a mountain that had a definite looking black top to it. That's when the fire came down when Moses was on Mount Sinai. You see the land of Jethro and the well that Moses was at when he met the daughters of Jethro. The Red Sea crossing. Ryan talked about Elam, where there are palm trees and wells. You see the location of the golden calf. You see, I don't know if that one's it right there, but you see carved inscriptions on these rocks. You find a picture of a menorah, a Jewish menorah on a rock. You see a calf, or again, a place where the golden calf was created and then destroyed. The cave of Elijah. And of course, it sticks right out, the Split Rock area. You actually see a high up this big, tall, two rocks with a split down the middle. And he even shows you where there was an area down below where the water would have pooled up and would have been a place for people to come and to get water. So a ton of archaeological evidence pointing that this is what we're looking for. This is actually the biblical account. Again, this is not giving any credence to Islam. Islam believes in Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Adam and so on. However, Islam teaches that all of them were Muslims. So the teachings of who they were are revisionist. It's make-believe history. And again, these archaeological sites existed even before Jesus Christ was born. So tons of evidence in here for you to check out. Ryan, in the video as well, you interviewed an eyewitness who saw this because he was flying, because he was a World War II veteran. What happened during that interview? What information did he give you?
Sure. Well, first, the other piece of evidence that people can see, just so they understand how much there is, that I often forget to mention each piece of evidence that's in this film because there's so much. But the altar that Moses built at the foot of the mountain, you see a match for that there as well. So really every element of the book of Exodus, you can pretty much see right before your eyes. So it's amazing where we've jumped from where the consensus was no evidence been found yet to now almost literally every single thing described you can see, just like that. As for the Saudi pilot, he was interviewed by Bob Cornuke, who is one of the few people who originally went to Mount Sinai. The first in modern history, recent decades, was Ron Wyatt, and then Bob Cornuke went in. We now know from historical sources that other people went because this area has been known as Mount Sinai going back, into the time of Josephus. But in modern history, that's how it went Ron Wyatt and then Bob Cornuke. And Bob Cornuke was arrested there. And so he's in the film interviewing a Saudi pilot who served during or an American pilot from World War II who served the Saudi government. And he actually talks about how on their maps, it didn't say that there was this no-fly zone over Mount Sinai, but he was told by the Saudis, don't fly over that blackened mountain over there because it's Mount Sinai and we believe that you shouldn't fly over it, otherwise your plane may crash because it's holy. And that was just so amazing. And seeing him talk about it in the film, seeing how that touched him, and now seeing this evidence come forward to verify that account, it's really a touching end to the film.
And please share with our audience about Neom. This is a place that you mention in the documentary, and this is a super city that the Saudi government is planning on building, and you said it's 33 times the size of New York. Please talk about the threat that poses to these archaeological sites.
Sure. Well, the sites that are officially sealed off, where you have a fence around them, I don't think they're going to take the fence down and destroy the sites. But what's so compelling when you go to these sites is that it takes a while to get there because they're in the middle of the desert. So you feel like you're going back in time. And no one that I know of has dug, at all. There might have been a little bit of an excavation by the Saudis, just very surface level. So there's a ton to be found. Now we know that the Saudis, through what they call Project Neom, are building this super city that's supposed to be 33 times the size of New York City. And it's going to be as high quality, even more high quality, than Dubai. with robotics and artificial intelligence and entertainment of all kinds, all being centered in this area. It's basically going to be its own country, where certain laws, including Sharia laws regarding businesses, are going to be lifted to some degree. The Saudi government recognizes that they need to modernize, and so the Crown Prince is betting that by rapid, expensive modernization, that will keep him in power and give him a place in history. Now, that's all positive, because that means that the Saudis will be interacting with, people that many of them have been taught to hate, and nothing destroys hate better than meeting the person you're supposed to hate. But here's the negative. Right in the middle of it is Mount Sinai and most of these sites. So sites that aren't fenced off could be destroyed. Evidence that we have yet to be found could be destroyed through the massive construction. Evidence that may not be destroyed, you won't be able to get to because you can't get under the buildings, the hotels and stuff. And really, equally important is the scenery again, because if you've ever been to the pyramids in Cairo, you don't feel like you're going back to ancient Egyptian times, because you have like a hotel with a swimming pool like 100 feet away from the pyramids. You can look at the pyramid from your hotel room. And we don't want that to happen. I want this entire plain where the Israelites probably camped, all of these sites and the areas around them preserved so that we can find evidence in the future, so that people feel like they're going back to the times of Moses and are walking in his footsteps. So that's a big concern of mine. And by the way, Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and other extremist forces, and I talk about this in a follow-up film on our YouTube channel for this, are also now reacting to the film. And guess what? According to them, it's a giant Jewish American satanic conspiracy against Islam. And that's because, of course, that they hate the Saudis.
And what are the implications of that? That's actually the next question I was going to ask you about, because I did see that follow-up video where you're talking about how the Iranian regime, the Muslim Brotherhood, other jihadist groups have seen the video. What has their reaction been? I know you just mentioned a minute ago that it's some type of Jewish plot, which is no surprise because they're always blaming the Jews for one thing or another. But yeah, what would the implications be to those jihadist groups if this actually is true, if it's actually proving the biblical account? Of course, when these events and these places are talked about in the Bible, it's before the incarnation of the eternal Son of God in human flesh. So it's before Christianity, quote unquote, but it's still proving that the Bible is accurate, which of course is something that is actually fairly recent. So they're only around the 1000, 1100s that the whole claim about the Bible being corrupt even came about. But this is proving the biblical account is accurate. And what are the problems there for the jihadist groups, the Iranian regime, etc., and even Saudi Arabia itself?
Anything that's good for Saudi Arabia is something that's viewed negatively by Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, and then other jihadist groups. And of course, Saudi Arabia has its own jihadist extremists that they sponsor, but they have rivals in the region. And so all of these groups, though, have kind of this apocalyptic end times mindset. And so there are entities linked to the Iranian regime who are saying, well, there's one branch that are saying, yes, this is true. The film is absolutely true. But the reason that this information is coming out is because the Saudis want to control it, because it's an important, in their mind, Islamic holy site. And they're going to use it to build and give religious legitimacy to the throne of what they would describe as like their antichrist, the Dajjal. So in their mind, having all of these robots and having all this technology, all of which they view as violating Islam, in the area where Mount Sinai is for them the fulfillment of an end times prophecy and basically setting the stage for Armageddon. You then have this other branch that says all of this is made up. They say that I'm Jewish. I'm not. and we're making this up so that the Zionists can claim the land, So we can say, oh, well, Mount Sinai is Jewish, it is Christian, and so we must take it from the Muslim world, and the Saudis are going to go along with it because they're evil. And so both sides are saying it's a Jewish plot. The one that says, yes, it's all true, and this is part of the Islamic version of the Antichrist coming forth to destroy Islam. And then there's the others that are saying, no, it's all made up, but yes, it's still part of the Jewish American Saudi plot to bring about the rule of the Antichrist and destroy Islam.
And what we need to take into account too is the whole view of the Mahdi, the end times figure in Islam. The Shia or Shiite believe that that's the 12th Imam that disappeared a long time ago. He's actually coming back, where the Sunni branch, which is the majority of Muslims in the world, would say, well, no, he's just a new figure who's never been here before. So obviously Sunnis and Shias disagree on a number of things. And it's interesting to bring this into the equation of finding biblical accounts of actual archaeological sites found in, what we now know as Saudi Arabia. Ryan, this is a great documentary. I know people are going to love it. I know the views on YouTube are going to go even higher now because people know about it. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to point people to your site where they can find more. Please share with people where they can find out more about this and what site they can point people to.
Sure. So the name of the film is Finding the Mountain of Moses, if you want to look it up on YouTube. But the URL, so that you can get updates from us, because we're always updating the site with new evidence, is SinaiInArabia.com. And then that's how we can keep in touch with you. And if God allows it, and we're optimistic this is going to happen, it looks like there's going to be tours to the area for Christians. First time in history, Saudi government allowing Christian tours and also allowing tours to Mount Sinai. So that's something that everyone that's watching could potentially be a part of if all that goes smoothly. So we're preparing the ground for that.
And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Ryan Mauro, thank you so much for being here today on Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you.
Friends, again, share this with people. Let them watch it as well. Very interesting documentary. Again, you'll see video evidence of a number of places that we read about in the Bible. Again, does this all of a sudden prove that Islam is true? No, it does not in any sense whatsoever. Again, Saudi Arabia is the new name or new term for that area. It was just known as Arabia many years ago. Again, these archaeological sites were before the time of Muhammad. Islamic theology is still false. We find biblical accounts lining up with these archaeological digs and places. And again, it's regardless of where they're located. However, we need to point to what has the most evidence for it. We need to follow the truth where it is. We need to follow the evidence where it leads. And again, that is in what we now know as Saudi Arabia. But again, this is just verifying the biblical account of these places. And we'll see you next time here on Colliding Worldviews.